Thank you. I have a question for the audience. How many of you have voted or plan to vote on November 2nd? And this audience, I want to tell you, the candidates, is really right. I got two questions immediately for Mr. Floyd. He said, if you're an Eisenhower, Mr. Floyd, if you're an Eisenhower Republican, then do you favor the top income tax rate under the Eisenhower administration? Do you know what that was, and do you favor it?
No, I do not favor the top income rate under the Eisenhower administration. As an Eisenhower Republican, I embrace what was important to him as a man, which is that the federal government does have a role, but a limited one at that. And that you have a personal responsibility that should not be intruded by the federal government. Now here's the thing. Recently, Congress voted to determine whether they should stay in session and work on the tax cuts that are soon to expire. And I am absolutely displeased and disgusted by both sides of the aisle, including my opponent, who decided taking a month off on adjournment was more important than voting on the tax cuts that affect everyone in this room.
I'll now give an opportunity for either of the other candidates to respond.
Great. Dwight Eisenhower is the man who started the interstate highway system and thought there was a federal role for transportation throughout the United States. Dwight Eisenhower is the man who started a federal involvement in public education and assistance to schools impacted because of local circumstances. Dwight Eisenhower was a president who signed the first civil rights legislation and didn't say, we'll leave it to the local communities and the states. Dwight Eisenhower is not a bad model to have for a proper federal role, but Dwight Eisenhower stood for things that my opponent, as I gather, as he goes around, comes out against in the context of his own position.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you.
You want to respond?
Let me just add that Dwight Eisenhower is also the president that warned us about the military-industrial complex and war profiteering. That is exactly where we are now. War is a business. And he was the first one to warn us about it. He'd be turning in his grave right now.
Mr. Berman, the question from the audience was, do you favor term limits for Congress, the state legislature, the city and county government, where the president is term limited to 2 terms?
I try, and this isn't usually, I try not to be a total hypocrite. And for me to say I favor term limits would be laughable on its face. But let me ask you, those of you who see the appeal of term limits, we've had term limits in Sacramento since 1990. For those of us who are old enough to remember, the legislature and state government in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and state government since 1990, I suggest to you that term limits is not only not a panacea, but the fact is that frequently the unintended consequences of superficially appealing reforms were very much against effective and responsive government. Thank you.
I appreciate Howard's view on this, but I don't think term limits are what's wrong with our state. I think gerrymandering is. And I would say the grandfather redistricting should consider that.
Well, I actually believe that both are the problem. Gerrymandering is a major issue, which is basically ensure the perpetual re-election of the incumbent. But at the same time, I think we need a safeguard in the Constitution, just as they did with the president after Roosevelt, where we ensure that they're only limited to a certain amount of time. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's what we have in these districts.
Thank you. I've read my ballot propositions, and I wanted to ask the 3 of you for some advice to see if you could agree on these 3 propositions for me, give me some help. So, Mr. Rodriguez, you're first up. Proposition 19, the marijuana initiative. Are you for or against it, and why?
Well, I'm for it because life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are the fundamental rights, or the fundamental pursuits in this country, and or the rights. And ultimately, we are not the government's children. If you're over 21, you should be able to make up your mind what you want to ingest into your body. Now, I'm not saying the same thing should apply to all drugs, but we have to consider alcohol and tobacco have been legal for years, and it's much more dangerous than cannabis. That's my position on it.
And both other candidates, I assume you agree with Mr. Rodriguez? What's your opinion?
I would say, as a manager of a business, a local business, if Prop 19 passes, we as a business would not be able to do drug tests until after an accident happens. Now, I wish I could believe that marijuana was always used for the best intentions. But unfortunately, I have seen with my own friends from high school, as well as employees in my own company, the damage of what marijuana can do for your ability to react and the ability to really communicate with other people. So I do vote no on Prop 19.
When I was here in August, I hadn't really looked at the initiative. I have now, and I will be joining Mr. Freud in voting against that initiative.
I also found on the ballot a Proposition 20, and there's also Proposition 27. Mr. Berman, Proposition 20, for or against it and why? This is
explain to the audience.
This is a proposition for the Citizens Redistricting Commission to go ahead and determine the boundaries for House districts rather than the state legislature in Sacramento.
The other way around. No, the gentleman is the other way around. Prop 20 would put the congressional redistricting into the commission that passed in. Oh, well, I'm trying. I'm missing so far. I'm opposed to Proposition 20 for two reasons. One, and I have represented in the 1970s and in the 1990s districts that were court-drawn. The notion that all these situations are a result of legislative redistricting is nonsense. For 20 of the last 40 years, we've had court-order drawn lines, and that hasn't changed my political results one way or another. Secondly, there's a provision in Proposition 20 that says, to the maximum extent feasible, I just have to finish this phrase. Just let me finish this phrase. There is a provision in that proposition that says, to the maximum extent feasible, people of the same income and the same work opportunities should be drawn into the same districts. The notion that we are going to get so separatist that you're going to have country club districts and poor people only districts is quite
Thank you very much.
Comments?
Our founding fathers always thought it was wiser that the people choose who represents them, not the other way around. Where I differ with, I understand Howard and I are going to have, or the Congressman and I are going to have completely different views because his brother was influential in redistricting the state in 2000. I believe that a committee that has 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 other registered voters will be more than able to effectively redistrict the state of California.
Ditto. Having legislatures draw the district lines is like having the fox guard the hen house. It's absurd. I prefer anyone other than legislators to draw the district lines.
Mr. Freud, I also am perplexed about Proposition 23, the air pollution control law. Do you recommend a vote for or against it, and why?
Okay. I think if the economy was in a better state, we wouldn't even have this proposition on the ballot. Now, Proposition 23, which I do support that it gets passed, suspends AB 32 until unemployment is below, I believe, 5.5% of the state. This has happened 4 times since 1980. This is something that we can do. I think the other thing that we have to question ourselves is we have to be very careful to pass bills and propositions that say they are for a greener environment, when in reality what they do is make it so difficult to have a business here, they get up and leave and go to countries like India and China that have much less or much fewer environmental regulations.
Thank you.
We completely disagree. I'm totally against Prop 23. Prop 23 is funded by a few out-of-state oil companies who don't want, who want to stop the shift to alternatives to fossil fuels, to electric cars, to solar power, to wind energy. And let me tell you, both for economic grounds, for environmental grounds, and most of all, for foreign policy grounds, there is nothing more important than reducing our reliance on fossil fuels.
What Prop 23 pretends to do is exactly what I pretend to do in Washington, which is cut as much regulation and bureaucracy as possible so that businesses can thrive and grow and hire employees again. I'm not even sure what's causing global warming. I don't think anyone here can tell us, but to automatically assume that we're the cause of it because 95% of supposedly scientists have said so. I've seen other reports. I'm not convinced. I'm sure the planet's changing. Whether we're the cause of it, I'm not sure, and I'm not willing to sacrifice jobs for it.
Can I respond to quickly? Now, I believe that the environment is important. I grew up on a 220-acre farm in Minnesota. But I would like, okay, 15 seconds. No policy, change that. Let me restart again. I'll take more than 15 seconds to begin. So here's the thing. We at the business I work at, Sunrise Ford on Lancashire Boulevard, we're selling fuel-efficient vehicles and hybrids way before AB 32 ever came about. And the American consumer, with their buying power, will decide the greenness of our country, not any legislation or policy that's passed in the federal government.
Second crash at the same question, let me remind everyone that everything we have done, if you lived in California in the 50s and 60s and you saw the smog and you saw the air pollution and then saw the regulations we made, which made substantial steps towards improving that condition, the automobile industry and the energy industries, absent government regulation, would be bankrupt today because they are continuing to push things that were against the interests of the people and caused terrible consequences to our environment and to our energy consumption.
15 seconds.
Once again, it's a matter of regulation. If the businesses were so profitable and doing so well, why do we have to bail out Chrysler and GM?
The next question is a pop quiz for all three of you. Wendy Gruhl, our city controller, put out a report last month.
John, which person first they can give?
Well, I'm going to ask all of them for the all pop quiz. They can all respond. And she did an audit on the use of the stimulus money by the city of Los Angeles. $111 million of stimulus money was given to the city of LA. How many jobs did the city of LA create with the $111 million? Any guesses? How many?
55.
55, how many?
I was going to say 74.
Under 100.
Right, 55. And how many jobs were targeted by the city of LA? What was their goal with $111 million, according to Gruhl's report? How many did they want to create, intend to create by it? Any guesses?
I thought it was like 255 or around that number.
That's right, 264. That's $420,454 per job. Why is this? Please.
Well, here's a perfect example. I think when the government gets $1.10 maybe gets to where it's supposed to go, let's make those numbers a little bit bigger. In my